Greetings everybody, welcome back. In this long ago promised and way overdue episode, I'm going to cover the progress I've been making on the Fenwick Williams Catboat project. With all the other projects I've got going on, as well as personal and professional life, it's been going slow, but I have been making some progress on starting to dismantle it, as well as starting to do some documentation and some historical research on it. But I do have a couple of housekeeping things I need to cover with you before I get into that. As well, you know, if you've watched this channel for a while, I do a lot of work on these projects with Total Boat products. After purchasing these products on my own for a while, I teamed up with Total Boat to do some DIY demonstrations of how they work and my personal reviews of them. One of the advantages of that is that they gave me some coupon codes to send along to my viewers so that you could save a few bucks on some particular items and some shipping. Well, recently they've done away with the coupon code system, and they've migrated to a new system they call their affiliate program. From now on, just go to totalboat.com/Salvation Navy, and you'll automatically get any discounts that are applied to any particular products, as well as whatever break on shipping you can get. So you can go to the link listed above or use the QR code, and it'll make it a lot simpler. Now, I've already got a lot of content in the can I just need to get to edit. One of the things I want to show you is how I and you can build a solid mahogany hatch for these Harrisoff America and Eagles. And speaking of Harrisoff Eagles, I want to show you the second Eagle that I've purchased called Seneca Lee, tell you a little bit about it, and show you some of the things I'm doing to bring it back to life, including some work on the rub rails. Applying a barrier coat to the deck and cabin top to handle the spider cracks, then repainting her with some good old-fashioned Kirby paint, along with a lot of work on the bright work, and something a little extra special I think you're going to want to see. Earlier this summer, I got to visit my Coastie daughter out in Port Angeles, Washington. Got a great tour of the Coast Guard Cutter Active, and by the way, just recently she was promoted there on the left up to Lieutenant Junior grade. And being that Port Townsend is right next to Port Angeles, I ducked over to visit the Port Townsend Foundry. Got to meet with Pete and Kathy Langley. Pete and Port Townsend Foundry are working on some projects for wooden boats for veterans that I work with out in San Francisco. A lot of the parts you see here are parts he made for the Coast Guard Cutter Eagle. It was embarrassing. I was like a kid in a candy store. He was kind enough to give me a tour of the place, and I really can't wait to show you some of the footage from that. It is an amazing place to visit if you're into this kind of thing. On another upcoming episode, I want to show you about what I did with some broken cheek blocks for my Catboat. They were used for the reefing system, and they were just completely shot. They were originally made from some cheap stamped metal and some crummy plastic that had just deteriorated. After spending tons of time looking for replacements and not being able to find anything I wanted, I just decided I'm just going to make them myself. So I'll show you how I did that soon. But now on to my Fenwick Williams Catboat called Patchy Fog. Now, you may remember from some previous episodes that I rescued this boat from Gloucester, Massachusetts just before it was going to be taken to the chainsaw. You also might remember I was trying to locate this fellow whose contact information I had lost. Thanks to some viewers of this channel, I was able to track him down. This is Don Gorvet, and he's got a gallery up in that area. Definitely check him out on Facebook or his website. He does some really beautiful and interesting work. I'm finding out a lot of interesting history about this old boat. Bob Stewart and Spencer Day have been very generous with their time in doing some research and sharing it with me on Marsh Nymph, which was the original name of the boat. It's listed in the Catboat book as being designed by Fenwick Williams for the Alden office and built by the Story Boatyards in Essex, Massachusetts. But going through the registry in the back of the book, the Shipbuilders of Essex lists Marsh Nymph as having been built by Marshall Cogswell. So there is still a little bit of confusion as to exactly where this boat was built and by whom, but we're working on it. My thanks again to Spencer Day and Bob Stewart and everyone else who's helping me out doing the research on this. It is tremendously appreciated. Now, before I get into some things I've actually been doing on the boat, I wanted to go over the issue with the ribs. More specifically as to why I call them ribs instead of frames. I knew I was going to get some comments about it, and I did, so let's go over it. Before I even started doing these videos, I talked to a few people, some shipwrights, looked into various sources that I trusted as to whether or not these are called ribs or they're called frames. Now, I know there are very strongly held opinions on this matter, but By all the qualified shipwrights that I've spoken to, including one that we have working on our vessel Clover out in San Francisco, there really is no strict definition as to what is a frame and what is a rib. However, most of the people that I am talking to say that frames are things that are hewn out of larger pieces of wood, and ribs are something that are steamed or bent into place. Although frames can be bent into place too. So by all the definitions of people who know a lot more about this than I do, it's okay to call them either one. However, calling them ribs is certainly accurate. And for the sake of consistency, that's what I'm going to stick to. Now the reality is, in order to get to the structure of this boat and figure out even how I'm going to start fixing it, everything in the cockpit, like the seats and the combing and even the cockpit sole, as well as the cabin, need to go. Now I'm not going to throw them away because, as bad as it looks, these materials are actually in pretty good shape in a lot of places, so I'm intending on reusing as much as I possibly can. Additionally, it's important for me to be able to document the structure of this thing, so I'm not going to take it out piece by piece. Instead, I'm going to try and take it out in large sections and keep it in storage so I can measure it, clean it up, and use it again. Now before I can start on that, I needed to get the decking off, most of which I got off as you saw in the last episode. The last little bit's been cleaned up and taken off as best I could, as intact as I could get it, and the only major part of it left is the king plank. And that's not really going to come off until I can get the cabin top off. Now each time I take something off, I do my best to measure the structure underneath up. Take as many pictures as I possibly can and put those measurements to those pictures. Some of the big challenges though were other things that were still in the way, like the original fuel tanks still in there, which unfortunately still had gasoline in them. That was interesting getting those out. Now the carlins and beams under the back section of the cockpit combing were so rotted, it didn't take much at all just to lift the entire thing out once a few fasteners had been cut. Interestingly, it was rotted just exactly where some old vents were on the sides of the cockpit combing, and that allowed me to lift the whole thing out and keep the port and starboard side of the cockpit combing completely intact. Luckily, the bead board on the inside of the cockpit combing is actually in pretty good shape, so I'll be able to reuse most of that. However, the plywood that goes around the outside of the combing is completely shot all over, so that's one of the reasons it was easier to pull this out. I kept chipping away then at smaller pieces, taking them out, putting them in storage, measure them up, photograph them, put tags on things so I know where everything went. Finally got both of the bench seats out, and then it was time to take out the cockpit combing, in this case the port side. It was amazing how easily they came out. It was just held on to that carlin, some little crummy iron nails. Just peeled it back, came right off. Still think most of that wood is usable. Clean it down, sand it down. Some penetrating epoxy in there to fill in the holes through the iron thickness. I can use that again. It's a good bead board. Tongue and groove rather. It really is important to me to have sections like this come out intact. It allows me to better document it, better understand how to put it back together, and a lot easier to measure up. Now once I got the seat benches and the cockpit combing and a little else out on the port side, it was time to do the same thing to the starboard side. Got the whole thing opened up, cleaned out a little bit, and it gave me a lot better view of the interior structure. But there's a lot more to do. At this point though, before I do any more dismantling, it's time to measure some more stuff up. Let me show you how I did that. One of the advantages of having something like an iPad is that I can take photographs of it and then place those photographs into an application on the iPad that allows me to use their little digital pencil to then draw in some notes. I can then use measurements that I took off the beams and the carlins and the knees and the elbows and all of that stuff and put it right there on the picture to see exactly what that measurement should be. I can even put the pictures side by side with the original plans and make notes on there, so that as I start taking more things out, I'm going to be able to go back and see exactly what was supposed to be there and what its measurement should be. So once the cockpit had been really opened up by taking the bench seats out, getting the cockpit combing out, and some of the structure that was holding that up, it certainly gave me a lot more open view of the structure of the boat. However, to get to it and to really repair it, I'm going to need to take more out. That Atomic 4 engine needs to come out regardless. Even if I use it again, I can't repair it in the boat. It's got to come out. The cockpit sole woodwork is going to have to come out. After that, I need to carefully start disassembling and disconnecting the cabin from the rest of the boat. Now my plan, like a lot of the stuff with the cockpit sole, is to lift it out in one piece, if possible. I'll probably rig something up at the top of the tent that houses the whole thing and just lift the whole thing up a few inches so that it gets it out of the way and I can get more access to the structure of the boat. So that's what's coming next. So occasionally when I couldn't work outside on this or any of the other boats, I'd find some little project that I kind of stashed away for a cold or rainy day. And one of the things I've started to do is disassemble the original wheel. I'm hoping I can reuse it, but I'm not quite sure yet. The segments of it began coming off easily enough, and it took me a little while to figure out how it was put together. At first I thought they were being held in place by some sort of a screw. Looking at what I thought closely through a magnifying glass was a screw head, I tried to unscrew them at first, but no go. Very light prying on some of these pieces eventually yielded one or two of these little nails, I guess you'd call them. I don't know what they are. I've never seen anything quite like them. They almost look like larger versions of what was holding the cockpit combing on. They're certainly not screws, and there's very little of them left. But they do have this strange little square head on them with a little hole in them. I've never seen anything quite like this, so if you know what they are, do me a favor and leave a comment down in the comment section. As I took each segment off, I numbered it so that I can put it back together exactly how it went. If there's not too much iron sickness to this wood, I will try and use it again. One way to revive it is to use penetrating epoxy, possibly even under a vacuum, to really infuse it in the wood and stabilize it. I'd really like to try and use this again if I possibly can, but continuing on this is going to be another rainy day or winter project. Well, that's about all I've got for this episode. Like I said, I've got a lot more footage to produce episodes from, and I'm hoping now that the sailing season is over and things calm down a little bit, I can get some more editing done and get some more episodes out to you. Thanks again to Total Boat for always sponsoring my projects. Oh yes, and one more thing. Go Navy. Beat Army.